any other German city, the port of Hamburg benefited from colonialism. It made local families immensely rich. But now that colonial past is under scrutiny. In 2015, a special research institute was set up to look into it.
Quite apart from the German colonies, Hamburg played a big role in European colonialism in general. The port was a trading hub for merchandise from other European colonies.
The past is present in the city's architecture, but not just that. This store, founded in 1879 to equip colonial troops, still sells old-school outfits for the tropics, and the owner has no problem with that.
Personally, I always say it's part of history that we cannot change, but from which we must draw lessons.
The city wants to go a step further. The authorities say they want to decolonize public space. The goal? To shine a light on a past largely forgotten or hidden.
We are making sure we talk about colonialism in schools. We are looking at street names to identify those that refer to the colonial past, and we are trying to see where certain injustices still exist. There are a lot of steps to take.
First off is the statue of Bismarck, the first German chancellor. The city plans to refurbish it, but also to remind people of its colonial context, so everyone will know that Bismarck was also the architect of the German Empire.
Well, those are our top stories in the newsroom. Thank you for watching.
This week we're in Accra, the capital of Ghana. It's a veritable hive of creation, music, art and fashion. We're in this West African culture hub to meet some of the designers kickstarting Africa's style revolution.
I'm the founder and creative director of the Ghanaian-based luxury fashion brand, Christy Brown.
Ghanaian brand Christy Brown is leading a new wave of African designers, making their mark on the world stage.
I should describe the fashion scene in Accra. Vibrant. It's just full of endless possibilities. There's so much going on at the moment. Over a decade ago, you couldn't even imagine how exciting this industry was going to become, but you see so many new designers, so many young up-and-coming brands. So, you just feel the energy and just the optimism of this industry. Ghanaians are going through, a renaissance of sorts where they're very accepting of themselves and allowing themselves to run free with their imagination and creativity. And you see that in our art, in our music, and fashion. Look at it and tell me if it's sticking out like the other side.
Christy Brown is one of a number of African designers worn by celebrities. Alicia Keys and Beyoncé's dance troupe, as well as Black Panther Wakanda Forever actress Denai Guerrera at a recent premiere of the film. The US and Europe are the brand's biggest markets.
Tell us about your journey to become a fashion designer. First of all, the name Christy Brown is my grandmother's. So my grandmother, she was a seamstress all her life, and she never had her, her own fashion label. So in 2008, when I was in my final year of university in Legon, I was studying psychology actually, not fashion. There was a movement happening on the continent. I say it was the Africa Rising movement, and everyone was really filled with that optimism of where the continent was headed. You could see a lot more Africans doing amazing things all over the world and being highlighted for it. And I really wanted to be a part of that movement. So the best way I knew how was through my passion, which is fashion. I knew a different kind of African woman, and which is very different from what you see on the news about Africa and poverty or wars. And I just felt that, this brand needs to speak to that. It needs to speak to that global woman who embraces her her heritage, still very modern, and how do we use our tradition and culture to tell a story in a way that we know best?
African designers are making space for themselves on the global fashion stage. US Vogue's November issue features Ghana, with Black Panther actress Michaela Cole on the cover, photographed in the capital, her grandmother's hometown. Like all fashion capitals, Accra has regular fashion weeks, like this one about to get underway, the Glitz.
I'm so excited. Actually, this is my first time on Glitz, and I'm very, very happy to be on Glitz. Wow.
Glitz Fashion Week is a fashion week for designers across Africa and the models across Africa. We all come together to work and showcase what Africa is all about.
But now we see Ghanaian designers evolving and trying to adapt from different cultures and different ethnicities and different backgrounds and then put them together to fit the contemporary style we have now. So, I mean, kudos to us, we're doing so well.
Pour moi, le Ghana, c'est l'un des pays où la mode est beaucoup plus développée. Contrairement aux pays francophones et tout, le Ghana, c'est un high level.
Ghana is one of the rising stars in terms of fashion. We have very innovative designers that are working with the elements we have here.
It's not just about talent, it's about the business side of fashion and beauty. And there's access to market for them, there's funding for them, there's branding opportunity and all of that. So that's what I'm passionate about, and that's what I'm hoping that we can use the platform that we've created in the last 10 years. That's what we have done. I mean, we've worked with a lot of brands that are now showcasing abroad and now selling and sporting, but we want to see more of that.
Glitz Fashion Week is where labels can make a name for themselves. Aisha won African Designer of the Year here in 2018 and 2019. She's considered a pioneer of ready-to-wear in Ghana. Her work is also headlining a landmark London exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum, the UK's biggest ever focus on African fashion.
With more exhibitions like the ones at the V&A and more African brands highlighted on a global stage, it's like an education process, right? It allows the world to experience our fashion differently. Whereas before it felt costumey to one person or the other. Now you find that they're beginning to understand even that, oh, there are different regions, there are different parts of the continent, there are different countries that make up the continent. The different regions have their different aesthetics, and we're giving the world a crash course on how we do us.
And what do you think of this label of 1 billion people, African fashion?
It's not the greatest feeling to be boxed in, right? You just want it to be fashion in general. However, I'm just one of those people who are of the view that it's okay, call it what you want to call it. It's amazing clothes, do you want to wear it? Fine, but the onus is on us and how we represent ourselves.
As a luxury fashion brand, you're going head-to-head with brands like Chanel, Dior. What are the challenges with that?
I mean, these are brands who have been here for decades, you know, and so we look up to them. But for me, it's very important that the brands that come out of the continent establish our powerhouses. Who are our Chanels? Who are our Diors or our Vuittons? And just owning space as that. And the respect and the honor will come with it. We're just putting the work in.
So describe the idea behind Christy Brown, describe the clothing.
So Christy Brown is unapologetically African. I like to say that because we love print, not because we feel a print is African, but there's something in how colors and textures marry and what it does to even the psyche that I think as a brand we enjoy using a lot. But in terms of the cuts and the silhouettes are modern, they're very flattering, very feminine as well, but it exudes this sense of power and elegance at the same time, but it's really empowering. We create clothes that make you feel good. You know, you walk into a room and you know that, I've got this. That's what Christy Brown stands for.
And where do you get your materials from?
We source our fabrics from any and everywhere in the world. But the local market is also predominantly one of it, especially for our weaves and you know, any of the handmade dyes, they're usually made here, and we work with local artisans a lot.
Hello, my name is George Tete. I'm the creative director and founder of Ghanaian fashion label Atutete. We're in the Makola market. This is one of the biggest markets in Ghana. They sell fabrics, they sell haberdashery. It's a one-stop shop for everything.
How often do you come here?
At least once a week, yes. I come here to buy zips, I come here to buy buttons. This is one of the shops that I buy from.
So you want this?
Yes.
Ghana is famous for its beautiful fabrics, especially kente. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so kente is one of the hand-woven fabrics from Ghana, and it's for royalty, it's for big ceremonies. These are some of the traditional kentes that we have. This one is called the gold dust. That's why it's gold in color. Yes, and you know Ghana is one of the countries that produces gold, so that's what inspired this fabric. And then there's this one. It's called Ibusunya Dom. That means the strength in family or the strength in togetherness. This is also a very beautiful one. It's got different colors, but it all comes together. This will look very good on you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so this is the fabric that I use for my collection. Kente represents who we are as Africans, as Ghanaians. And also, I chose it because of the color palette. If you look at the collection back to basics, the predominant color is black and white. We actually use traditional fabrics to make modern pieces that anybody anywhere can use.
Your brand is 100% made in Ghana. Why is that important for you?
Why make my pieces from somewhere else when I can give business back to the people that live in Ghana?
You get your fabric from places like this, but also from an NGO in the north of the country. Tell us about that.
So aside kente, I also use fugu. Fugu is also hand-woven and it's got a striped pattern. This NGO is called Sonba Empowerment Center, and what they do is they bring together young girls, train them on how to make their fugu. And these are some of the ways that you can encourage sustainability.
Like Atutete, Ashayenzi's brand impacts the lives of the local community. This is where the crispy brown clothes are made, in Kwalegono, one of the poorest neighbourhoods of Accra. So you opened your factory here in this neighbourhood, one of the poorest neighbourhoods in Accra, a decade ago. Why did you choose this area?
To register is this size in town would have been just exorbitant, right, for a startup brand. But we came here and fell in love with the community. And just seeing the impact that we've had on the locals or the community is just so fulfilling.
Talk to us about that impact. What impact has that had on the community?
It's just what it represents, right? First of all, we employ a lot of people. So it stands as like a beacon of hope of sorts. Then for us, it's even seeing those who have passed through our doors. And when they come in, we see how they start out before they learn skill and then also progress in their careers. It gives meaning to all that we do. So welcome. This is our atelier. And this is where all the samples are made. In total, we have about 780 staff. I'm going to start with this lovely lady, Doris. Doris is probably one of our older staff, like even on the sampling team. She's from the community. She lives in Kwalegono. And Doris, you've been here how many years?
I've been here for 9 years.
When she came, she was so young and green. And now she's like one of our top sample makers.
It has really changed my life because without this company, I don't know where it would have been. That I have something to work and feed myself.
So this is our production floor. This, for example, is from our current collection. It's our fall 22, and it's a bubble hem dress. And this is the beautiful embroidery work that is our signature. Yeah, isn't it? It's all hand embroidered. The whole idea is to establish a global luxury brand from here, right? So it's important that we take inspiration and elements from here and modernize it and make it just palatable for the world. Miss Dorcas here is my longest serving staff member.
And you come from the local community?
Yes, please.
And what's it been like working here?
The way she talks to us, the way she encourages us, makes me work with her for a long time.
When you have a culture that values people and values the respect of humans or as an individual, being a fair trade company is a no-brainer. Fair wages, more than fair wages actually, how are your staff being taken care of, what kind of insurances do you have in place, even their working conditions is really important. The brand of the company should be able to pour into the lives of these people who are working with us. In terms of our road to net zero, sometimes it can feel like, oh, we're so far off from a B Corp. But just knowing that every little gesture, every little step counts. What kind of dyes are we using? That even influences the ecosystem or around what we do. And then it eventually affects like all the players involved in, in this ecosystem we're creating.
Sustainability has become a must for Ghana's creatives. Back in January 2022, France 24 broadcast this report, showing the landfill disaster happening just down the road from Aisha's workshop. Mountains of unwanted clothes, shipped from Europe and the US, and dumped here. At the Joyce Ababio College of Creative Design, sustainable clothes are a priority.
Our problems here in Ghana, for instance, is second-hand clothing that comes in here that ends up in our gutters. And what we decided to do to solve the problem was to buy it and redesign it into different things. So sustainability is very important to us.
As a designer, we have to be very conscious of the environment. So I incorporate that in some of my designs. I will use a piece to make an accent on a different design.
And some local designers are going zero waste.
We have a unique signature design, which is a mesh. And so this is it. And it's sustainable in its production. Because if you're using a fresh fabric, you end up literally producing no waste. And we're also able to use waste from other fashion houses.
Christy Brown is about to have a revamp. What can you tell us about it?
Next year, the brand is 15. What Christy Brown was 10 years ago, 12 years ago even, is very different from, where it is now. Women have come into their own in a way where they're not fighting. They're just manifesting their excellent and amazing self. And so there's less of a strife to have a seat at the table versus being awesome, harnessing your inner strength and inner power.
So describe that look. What does it look like?
So it's cleaner, less fuss, crisper. I find that it's modern, but it can also transcend the next, decade or so. It can sit anywhere in the world, and it's not just an African brand, quote unquote. It's just a fantastic fashion brand.
What do you think your grandmother would say if she could see her name written across the world?
She would be so proud, and at the same time, her blunt self will be calling me out, but why did you do this? I think she'll be smiling. She'll be smiling, yeah.
Aisha, thank you so much. Thank you. From Accra to the catwalks of Portugal at Lisbon Fashion Week, supporting local industries, respecting the environment, and showing reverence to cultural heritage, all while empowering women through her designs. Christy Brown is a label representative of a nation using fashion to bring about social change.
France 24, your economy explained. Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Brittany Griner touches down in the United States in a high-profile swap for Russia's Viktor Bout. Vladimir Putin says further prisoner exchanges are possible. The growing Sino-Gulf alliance as Xi Jinping visits Saudi Arabia, the Chinese leader attending an Arab League summit today. And France begins public discussions on end-of-life care, including whether assisted suicide should be legalised. Coming up, we'll look at the extent of public support for the changes. Thanks for joining us. I'm Nadia Massi in Paris. Our top story today. Brittany Griner is back home in Texas, nearly 10 months after she was arrested in Russia for carrying cannabis oil. The US basketball star freed in a prisoner exchange with Russia's Viktor Bout, a notorious arms dealer. Well, within the last few hours, Vladimir Putin has suggested that this agreement does keep the door open to other deals with the United States. Catherine Viet reports.
This is the moment Brittany Griner landed back on American soil. After 10 months spent in Russian jails, the star basketball player arrived in Texas early Friday morning. She was released from the Russian penal colony on Thursday. On the plane back to the States, Griner was asked how she was feeling.
Happy.
Well, are you ready for a flight?
Yes.
Thousands of kilometers away, Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout was touching down on the tarmac at Moscow airport. His wife and mother on hand to greet him.
Виктор, как вы добрались?
Ну, вроде добрался, это самое главное. Но вот посреди ночи просто подняли, сказали, собирайся, и все.
The prisoner exchange took place at Abu Dhabi's airport in the UAE, with Bout warmly greeted by two Russian officials. The man known as the Merchant of Death was serving a 25-year prison sentence for conspiring to support terrorists and kill Americans. But Moscow has been eager to bring home the former Soviet Air Force officer. Speaking at a news conference on Friday, Russian President Vladimir Putin didn't rule out further prisoner swaps.
Возможно ли другие?
Are other exchanges possible? Yes, everything is possible. This is the result of negotiations and the search for compromise. In this case, compromise was found, and we aren't refusing to continue this work in the future.
Russia continues to hold former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, who was convicted of spying. Washington says Whelan is being wrongfully detained. Russian media is reporting that talks to free him were continuing between Moscow and Washington.
In other news, China's President Xi Jinping has heralded a new era in relations with the Arab world during a visit to Saudi Arabia this week. After meeting Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman yesterday, today he's joining an Arab League summit with leaders from across the region. It's only Xi's third trip outside of China since the coronavirus pandemic began, and many analysts see it as a sign of growing Sino-Gulf friendship. Dozens of agreements were signed yesterday, from tech to housing.
China is willing to move forward together with Saudi Arabia in realising national revitalisation and in promoting greater development of the China-Saudi Arabia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership.
Turning now to news here in France, a citizens' council of 150 members of the public are meeting today to begin discussions on end-of-life care, including whether assisted suicide should be legalised. Now, as French laws have evolved over the past 2 decades, there are increasing calls to allow medically assisted deaths for those who are terminally ill. Joining me to discuss is France 24's Philip Turl. And Philip, first of all, tell us what the law currently says.
Right, well, this Commission convention is being held here at the Élysée Palace in Paris, the presidential palace. It's got age groups ranging from 18 to 87. These are all people who were asked to come at random from members of the public to talk about this issue, which is a pretty contentious issue here in France. There are two main forms. The first one is euthanasia, where a doctor administers a fatal dose to a patient who's at the end of their life or suffering from a life-threatening disease that can't be cured. The second form is assisted suicide, where it's the patient themselves that gives their own injection under the supervision of a doctor, and there will also be members of the public who are present. Both of those are, for the moment, not permitted in France. So if people in France want to have euthanasia or assisted suicide, they have to go to another European country, like, for example, the Netherlands or Belgium or Switzerland, where they are legal. So all the debate in France is how far will the French legislation go? And at the moment there is a law that's been revamped a couple of times, the last time in 2016, which will let people who are suffering from an incurable disease where their health is going down, they haven't got long to live, to be put under what is called constant sedation. So they will be sedated until they die of natural causes. But there's a debate going on the sidelines of that as to when those sedatives, that sedation can begin. And that is also something that many people are saying, well, you don't want to leave it until the last minute. We want to be able to take the decision if we want to end our lives. Well, we're still able to say goodbye to people and not when we're being sedated in a hospital. So all of these measures are being discussed this afternoon. There is certainly pressure on the French government to come up with some kind of plan. And I think that France is always a little bit reluctant to take these measures in hand and become a leader within Europe. We saw the same when it came to same-sex marriage. France was quite slow in adopting it, went ahead and did it. Now it's part of French law. And I think that in the long run, this will also become part of French law, but there is a very long debate ahead of everybody here. And there are two main points that are being discussed. One of them is, well, where do we stop respecting life, and where do we also put the Catholic Church in all of this?
And speaking of the Catholic Church, do we know to what extent they're swaying French public opinion on this?
Well, French public opinion is largely favourable. The opinion poll earlier this year found 94% approving the legalisation of euthanasia and 84% assisted suicide. Catholic Church is very much against it. Even the Pope spoke to Emmanuel Macron to warn him against bringing in this legislation earlier this year. So Emmanuel Macron is remaining very open-minded. He hasn't said whether he's in favour or against, saying that this is a very complicated and tricky subject to make an opinion about. That's why he's leaving this convention to make a decision and come up with recommendations, which will be published in the spring, and I think then the debate will really start.
Philip Tell, thanks very much indeed. Now, Hamburg is the German city with probably the heaviest colonial heritage. As Germany's biggest port, it profited the most from the colonies of the German Empire, which collapsed in 1918. But in the past few years, the city has been trying to reckon with its colonial past. One of the city's museums is to return a number of famous bronzes to Nigeria, and authorities elsewhere in the city are taking steps to remove the remaining traces of colonialism, as Nick Spicer outlines.
They are called the heart and soul of the long-gone kingdom of Benin, stolen by European colonizers in the 19th century. These 179 bronzes on display in Hamburg's Ethnological Museum will at last be sent back to modern-day Nigeria.
In this way, Germany's showing that these artworks got here illegally, and Hamburg played a special role because it was the essential transit point for them.
More than any other German city, the port of Hamburg benefited from colonialism. It made local families immensely rich. But now that colonial past is under scrutiny. In 2015, a special research institute was set up to look into it.
Quite apart from the German colonies, Hamburg played a big role in European colonialism in general. The port was a trading hub for merchandise from other European colonies.
The past is present in the city's architecture, but not just that. This store, founded in 1879 to equip colonial troops, still sells old-school outfits for the tropics, and the owner has no problem with that.
Personally, I always say it's part of history that we cannot change, but from which we must draw lessons.
The city wants to go a step further. The authorities say they want to decolonize public space. The goal? To shine a light on a past largely forgotten or hidden.
We are making sure we talk about colonialism in schools. We are looking at street names to identify those that refer to the colonial past, and we are trying to see where certain injustices still exist. There are a lot of steps to take.
First off is the statue of Bismarck, the first German chancellor. The city plans to refurbish it, but also to remind people of its colonial context, so everyone will know that Bismarck was also the architect of the German Empire.
Well, those are our top stories in the newsroom. Thank you for watching.
Now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with our very own Florence Villeminot. Hi, Flo. Today we are focusing on what is perhaps the most quintessential French thing, cheese, and not just any cheese, camembert.
The stinky, creamy delight that is camembert is the most popular of France's soft cheeses and perhaps one of the most famous cheeses in the world. It's an iconic national symbol of France that people are very proud of and love to eat. Every minute, over 950 camemberts are sold in France. That's about 15 camemberts a second. So, what makes a camembert so irresistible?
Le camembert, j'aime bien quand il est crémeux.
Fait, c'est là qu'on a toute sa saveur.
Je ne mange pas très souvent parce que c'est pas trop bon pour le régime, mais j'en mange quand même.
It's true, people love their camembert. I have one in my fridge as we speak. Flo, the interesting thing, though, is this emblematic cheese was recently dealt a blow by another cheese hailing from Italy.
This is the threatening cheese ball that is mozzarella. So, in the wake of the coronavirus lockdown, Italian mozzarella, for the first time, has overtaken camembert in sales and was therefore named the most popular soft cheese in France. So, has there been a major change in hearts and minds of French people?
Plutôt mozzarella ou camembert?
Mozzarella, définitivement.
Mozzarella.
Camembert.
Plutôt mozzarella en salade et plutôt camembert à tartiner.
Le camembert, moi je le prends à la fin du repas.
Alors que le mozzarella, c'est pour un plat carrément?
Oui, carrément, oui, c'est ça. Avec la salade, avec la tomate, c'est bien meilleur.
So what can explain this shift away from camembert toward mozzarella?
Well, there's several factors here. First of all, there's the adoption of fast food, restaurant fashion, easy home cooking. Basically, it's very trendy these days. But a lot of people are also blaming the drop in popularity on the makers of industrial pasteurized camembert, which accounts for about 90% of sales. So artisanal producers of traditional camembert made from raw cow's milk say that the commercial varieties lack flavor and therefore lead to disappointed customers. And it's true that if you've tasted both the raw and the pasteurized camembert, the raw one is really much better. It tastes a lot better. But it's banned in certain countries, like in the United States. So people smuggle raw camembert in all sorts of creative ways, sometimes in stinky sauce.
Or coffee grounds in Tupperware. All right, passons. This is just the latest spat in what's been a long-lasting war, actually, between small and industrial-scale producers of camembert.
That's right. There's been this massive war over the camembert brand, in fact. So traditionalists say that to be called camembert de Normandie, the cheese has to be made with unpasteurized milk produced by cows that graze on Normandy grass and formed using a ladle. So very specific way of making this traditional cheese. And in fact, this kind of camembert de Normandie is protected by something called an AOP, an appellation d'origine protégée, which is a trademark label. You can see it there. Now, for years, industrial producers of camembert got around the label by calling their cheese made in Normandy. So not camembert de Normandie, but made in Normandy. But recently, France's competition watchdog said that this label was very confusing and therefore banned it.
Now, traditionalists say it is important to protect that original recipe and the way of making camembert, which actually has been unchanged since the French Revolution.
The exact origins of camembert aren't exactly known, but legend has it that it was a woman named Marie Harel living near the village of Camembert, which is located in Normandy, who first started producing the cheese in 1791. So what is this recipe that hasn't changed in years? Well, you take the curds of unpasteurized cow milk, you transfer transfer it into these molds here using a ladle. The molds are turned over every 6 hours to be drained. Then what you get is this cheese, it's salted, and then it's transferred into a ripening room. This process is known as affinage. And here's where the penicillin works its magic. So over about a 3-week period, this mold will form over the cheese. You can see it here, but it's a friendly mold. You can eat it. And so once the cheeses are ready, they're wrapped in this trademark wooden box. It's a labor of love that cheesemakers are very proud of.
Tout est manuel, effectivement. Le moulage est tout à la louche. On passe 5 passages pour un fromage.
C'est un savoir-faire c'est un héritage, donc c'est important. C'est une fierté aussi. Ah oui, évidemment.
Si ça arrive qu'on n'ait pas le moral, on vient ici. Si on est fromager de camembert, alors on prend c'est une extase, une forme d'extase, c'est-à-dire c'est cette odeur très particulière qui est liée au fromage. Il y a un goût très particulier, mais il y a aussi une odeur.
Now that camembert does smell delicious for some, maybe not so delicious for others, but in any case, it is hard to overstate just how popular camembert is in France.
It's such a popular cheese that it has a couple of pet names. We're going to take a look at one. It's our word du jour, calendos, which is a very a loving way that people talk about camembert. It's a folksy, kind of slangy way. But before we go, I wanted to talk about some cheese etiquette. Very important in France. Like other cheeses, people tend to eat camembert at the end of the meal, so before dessert. You can eat the rind, as I said, it's delicious, gives it a lot of flavor. You cut it like a pie, and when you're buying a camembert, you want to make sure that it's ripe. You don't want to have this white chalky bit in the middle. So what you do is you open it, smell it smells delicious, and then you squeeze it with your thumb like this, and it has to be kind of soft, but your thumb shouldn't go all the way through. I can tell you've been eating this.
Do that in the supermarket?
They do, and so don't be surprised if you see people squeezing the camembert.
All right, Flynn, thanks so much for that camembert cheese. Now you know everything all about it. Don't forget, if you have your own questions for Flo about anything that's going on in France or with the French, you can always send her a tweet at Flo Villeminot for our next French Connections.
Hello and welcome to Access Asia. I'm Yuka Wayu. Coming up in this show, China rolls back its zero-COVID policy, but at what cost? We'll take a deep dive into President Xi Jinping's pandemic response and how Beijing is preparing to move forward. Protests rock Mongolia. Public anger over hundreds of thousands of tons of missing coal has sparked a broader anti-government movement. And is Indonesia's songbird craze still fueling illegal trade? Our correspondents went to find out. China has relaxed many of its pandemic restrictions, removing requirements for PCR tests in many places and allowing people to isolate at home. The new measures come following a wave of anti-lockdown protests. Joining me now is France 24's former Hong Kong correspondent Oliver Farry. Hi, Oliver.
Hello.
So, could this mark an end to China's draconian zero-COVID policy?
Well, it's probably a little too soon to say, but there's certainly a step in that direction. China's Joint Prevention and Control Mechanism this week announced what it called 10 new optimization measures, which do pave the way for a relaxation. There's no explicit mention of a dynamic zero-COVID, as the Chinese government calls it, but there is no explicit end to it, but there's no mention of it either. The messaging is quite different now. The health authorities are saying that Omicron is nothing to fear, as Li Guangxi, the director of the aforementioned State Council Joint Prevention and Control Mechanism, said to the state broadcaster CGTN. Also, the most respected of China's virologist, Zhang Yanshan, also said that Omicron was less scary than other variants. Now, this is very much a volte-face, a complete 180 turn from what the Chinese government had previously been messaging. A number of these new measures, as you mentioned, there's no need for mild cases to quarantine in centralised locations now. They can do that at home. That has not been the case for the past 3 years. There's also no longer a need to have a positive PCR test to use public transport or in public buildings. Lockdowns have been suspended in most places, but that does not necessarily mean they're gone forever. There are also some exceptions. For instance, institutions like schools can still demand positive PCR tests if they wish. And of course, the reality is also complicated. indicated, there is a lag between the official message getting out and the reality on the ground.
So it appears then that the recent protests did have some impact on the decision making.
Well, they certainly gave the Chinese government pause for thought. Even if there were already some moves towards a relaxation earlier in February, the protests had a number of routes. One of them was an infamous fire in a lockdown building in Urumqi in Xinjiang, in which 10 people died. And there was also the widespread anger and discontent as a result of televised images of the World Cup from Qatar, where the sight of maskless fans enjoying themselves from all countries hit home with Chinese people. It wasn't as if they were unaware of things being like that in the outside world, but there certainly was a confluence at that particular time, and this was to the extent that Chinese state TV started censoring close-ups of fans in the stands. Now, the protests were unlikely to immediately challenge Chinese government rule, but they probably did also think that allowing it to snowball into something else could actually be quite critical, and probably would have been potentially more perilous than having a wide-scale COVID outbreak after living with the virus.
And how has the public reacted to the announcement of the easing of COVID measures?
Well, the emotions are decidedly mixed. Many people, particularly in cities like Shanghai, which underwent fairly punishing lockdowns, there was rejoicing. There's also an outpouring of support for the late ophthalmologist Li Wenliang. He was the whistleblower who early on during the pandemic in Wuhan raised the alarm about a mystery virus in the city in late 2019, only to be reprimanded for spreading rumours, and he later died of COVID at the height of Wuhan's outbreak. He has since been rehabilitated and hailed as a martyr by the Chinese government, but an awful lot of Chinese people aren't really buying that. There are also people who might be immunocompromised who are worried about the impact of an outbreak on on themselves. The hashtag qualified test positive on the social media platform Weibo has been trending, and it's relayed many testimonies from worried people, particularly at a time when the messaging may not always be coherent, the messaging from the government, that is. And we have here now a few reactions from people on the streets in China to the relaxation of the measures.
I'm very happy. The policy came a little late, but it's better than nothing.
Life and work have become easier now, because we don't need negative COVID-19 tests to enter office buildings, which means we can now reduce the number of COVID-19 tests we take, and it in turn saves our time.
So is China sort of catching up with many other countries in the world that have done away with COVID curbs and have been living with the virus for the past 2 years? And how will the new policy play out in China, given that a lot of elderly people have yet to be vaccinated there?
Well, China is not exactly letting COVID rip, and there is bound to be a rise in cases, which is to be expected in a country that hasn't really any built-up immunity from previous infections. Western countries, which were devastated early on in the pandemic on a scale that wasn't really seen in China, are probably not the best comparison, but rather other East Asian countries might be a better measure, such as Vietnam, which eased restrictions a year ago and did rather well. It managed to keep death rates relatively low because of a very successful vaccination campaign. But there's also Hong Kong, which dragged its heels on vaccinating the elderly in 2021. And when it was hit by Omicron last year, its very, very strict arrival quarantine policies were breached as a result of that. It suffered the highest death rate in the world post-vaccination. So that is quite possibly something that might happen in China. Vaccination rates among the over 80s are still very, very low, and only about 40% of the population as a whole have vaccination boosters. A study commissioned by the science journal Nature estimated that between 1 and 2 million people could die if there was a large-scale outbreak. Now, it probably will be a lot less than that, but it's also possible that the death rates might be underreported, because the Chinese government will be trying its best not to squander the political capital that it built over keeping China largely free from COVID over the last 2.5 years.
We're going to have to wait and see how it plays out in China. Well, Oliver, Barry, thanks so much for your insight. In Mongolia's capital, Ulaanbaatar, students and other protesters have been demonstrating outside the parliament for days, accusing the government of corruption. The recent discovery that hundreds of thousands of tons of coal went missing between 2013 and 2019 fueled rising public discontent over inflation and inequality. Michael Maitland-Jones has more.
Anger against corruption in Mongolia's government still burning strong. People have been braving sub-zero temperatures in the capital for days now, to protest after a scandal in their coal sector. Arrests have been made, including the former CEO of one of the country's largest coal mining firms, but many hold their elected officials responsible.
Members of Parliament need is to dissolve the government. But the most troubling issue is that uneducated people have ascended to the highest office in Mongolia. So say that government is dissolved, what are we going to put in their place?
Fueling much of the frustration is Mongolia's economic situation. Inflation has soared to over 15%. The country's main sector of mining, which makes up nearly a quarter of GDP, is also under strain.
Mongolia is a mess. There is no accountability. They are digging everything. There's no rehabilitation. In mining, foreign miners get $10,000, while Mongolian miners get 10 times less than that. But the minerals that come from our ground are sold by international pricing standards.
The protests were sparked after 385,000 tons of coal were allegedly stolen from a stockpile in the Tavan-Tolgoi regions on the border with China. The commodity is a giant foreign export for Mongolia. Discoveries of large reserves of this, along with gold in the early 2000s, were a big driver of early economic growth. The pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine both caused major setbacks. Now the country, which previously thrived after transitioning away from a Soviet-dominated economy, is facing a tough combination of both financial woes and dissatisfaction with the people in charge of it.
Now, bird calls and songs are fascinating to many, and in Indonesia, they're big business. The nation's love for bird singing contests drives a multi-million euro industry, from breeding to sales to coaching. Activists, however, are warning that the sport is also fueling illegal wildlife trade. Our correspondent went to Surabaya in East Java to find out more.
These caged creatures are the artists at this competition. The birds sing for 7 minutes while judges rate their performances. They chirp and they croon, and the result is not unlike something you might hear in a forest. Coaches have to stand at a distance, each with his own little cheering technique. The sport was made popular in the 17th century by the royals of Java, and it still has a huge following. The songbird industry, though, has few women. Devi is an exception and travels with her team around the island every week to participate in contests.
I'm nervous. Even the wind makes a difference in these competitions.
Winners are identifiable thanks to a red flag. First prize is a motorbike, second prize is 2,000 euros. Birds are common pets in Indonesia. 1 in 3 homes has one. That's more than 80 million feathered friends living in cages. Here's the champion of the day. It's Devi's bird. The warbler has been in her team for 2 years.
This is his shower. He fought well, so we are cooling him down.
We really take care of him. We pay attention to all of his needs, so he doesn't lack anything. We see that he eats well, and if he needs, we give him extra food.
Poaching wild birds is illegal in Indonesia. Officially, competition birds are bred in captivity. In reality, their origin is difficult to prove. Birds represent 97% of the trafficked animals that Indonesian police save.
Birds don't need to be fed. They need freedom to fly freely. They can find food themselves. When they are a part of nature, they contribute to the ecosystem. They fulfill their true biological function.
Indonesia boasts a rich diversity of bird species, but it's increasingly difficult to find them in the wild.
And that's it for this week's edition of Access Asia. Do stay tuned to France 24. There's more world news coming up.
A program about women who are reshaping our world. We meet those who seek equality, be it in the boardroom or at the village well. The 51% brings you stories from across the globe about the women who are challenging the way we think.
The 51%, presented by Annette Young on France 24 and France24.com.
Hello and welcome. You're watching France 24. Coming up, Brittany Griner and Victor Bout return home. The U.S. basketball star and the Russian arms trafficker swapped on the tarmac in Abu Dhabi. Vladimir Putin opens the door to more prisoner swaps. Heavy Russian shelling in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region. In this edition, France 24's Robert Parsons speaks with the displaced in the central Zaporizhzhia region. Turkey's backlog of oil tankers waiting for paperwork clearance to exit the Black Sea. Their number climbs to 28. Insurers accuse Ankara of overzealousness in enforcing checks. This in the wake of Western sanctions on Russian oil. Coming up in the next hour, the world this week. In Iran, hopes of compromise nipped in the bud by the first execution since the protest movement began in September. Also, should the West worry when a QAnon-inspired far-right fringe group tries to stage a coup in Germany? Your reactions to those stories and much more, including the Brittany Griner Victor Bout swap on Facebook and Twitter. The hashtag is World This Week. Hello everyone, I'm François Picard. It's like the Cold War had come back. Scenes of joy in the United States and Russia after the homecoming of basketball star Brittany Griner and arms trafficker Victor Bout. Catherine Viet has the story.
This is the moment Brittany Griner landed back on American soil. After 10 months spent in Russian jails, the star basketball player arrived in Texas early Friday morning. She was released from the Russian penal colony on Thursday. On the plane back to the States, Griner was asked how she was feeling.
Happy.
Well, are you ready for flight?
Yes.
Thousands of kilometers away, Russian arms dealer Victor Bout was touching down on the tarmac at Moscow airport. His wife and mother on hand to greet him.
Виктор, как вы добрались?
Ну, вроде добрался, это самое главное. Но посреди ночи просто подняли, сказали, собирайся, и все.
The prisoner exchange took place at Abu Dhabi's airport in the UAE, with Bout
Сразу после
Russian President Vladimir Putin didn't rule out further prisoner swaps.
Возможно ли другие?
Are other exchanges possible? Yes, everything is possible. This is the result of negotiations and the search for compromise. In this case, compromise was found, and we aren't refusing to continue this work in the future.
Russia continues to hold former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, who was convicted of spying. Washington says Whelan is being wrongfully detained. Russian media is reporting that talks to free him were continuing between Moscow and Washington.
Yeah, let's pick up on that point with correspondent Ketevan Gorgistani in Washington. Ketevan, Republicans critical when it comes to Paul Whelan.
Yes, they basically are saying that they are happy that Brittany Griner is back, but they really focused on the fact that a former Marine was left behind, Paul Whelan, who was not part of that deal. And the White House had immediately a response to that criticism, which wasn't necessarily just among Republicans, but there were questions, of course, as to why Paul Whelan, who has been in jail for longer than Brittany Griner, was not included in that deal. And the White House simply said that they tried their best to get both of them out in that prisoner swap, but that in recent weeks it was clear that the Russians did not believe that Paul Whelan was on the table, that his release was not on the table, and that President Biden made the decision to get at least one of them out, Brittany Griner. And as the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, summed it up, he said the choice was one or none, one being Brittany Griner. It was not a choice between one of the two. The Russians really seeing Paul Whelan in a different light, as a different type of a prisoner. And there is some worry also that he has been left behind already twice. He was not freed in the previous prisoner swap and not in this one. And he and his family have, of course, expressed some concern as to why he's been treated so differently by the Russians and why the Americans aren't able to negotiate his release.
And there are also criticisms from the Democrats.
Yes, the criticism is, of course, not so blatant, but there are questions about what message this prisoner swap sends. You had, for example, Senator Chris Coons, who is a very close ally of President Joe Biden, who wondered whether this sent the message to countries around the world that if they snatch up Americans, the Americans will be willing at some point to negotiate for their release, possibly giving up some very high-profile prisoners on the other hand. And that is another element of the criticism, which is that it seems a little bit unbalanced between Brittany Griner and Victor Bout, between a basketball player who was arrested for possessing cannabis oil and a notorious arms dealer who was sentenced in the United States to 25 years. And the White House simply saying that Victor Bout has spent almost half of his sentence behind bars here in the United States, so it's not like he's being released without paying a certain part of his time in jail. But they also said that they had a moral obligation to get an American citizen home, in this case, Brittany Griner. But some are also worrying that the Americans are simply losing one of their biggest bargaining chips, because if Victor Bout was not enough to release someone like Paul Whelan, people are wondering then what can the U.S. offer to Russia that would be enough to release someone like Paul Whelan. As we heard from the Russian president, negotiations are still ongoing. The U.S. is saying that they will not give up. They will continue these talks. Where those talks will end and what the U.S. is ready to offer is a question.
Ketevan Gorgistani, many thanks for that live update. And as you heard Ketevan there say, there is the question of whether it is a fair and equal swap. One we'll be putting in the world this week. Just piece together the circumstances. In Brittany Griner's case, she's picked up at Moscow airport when they find cannabis oil in their luggage. When it comes to Victor Bout, well, it was a carefully laid trap by the U.S. drug enforcement agent that went all the way to Thailand. Our correspondent in Bangkok at the time was France 24's Cyril Payan, who's with us now. Cyril, that gives a sense of just what a big catch he was.
Of course, it was a huge story. It brings a lot of memories to to us. We were all younger, François, at this time, and even Victor Bout was very much
2010,
younger.
yesterday.
Indeed, yes, yesterday, absolutely. And even Victor Bout, when we see the footage on the tarmac, he changed a bit. He was in his 40s, now he's 55, and it was an extraordinary story because he was trapped, as you say, by the DEA agents in pretending to be Colombian FARC rebels for delivery of massive delivery of missile weapons. So it gives at the time a glimpse of Victor Bout's life. And so we had this chance with Guillaume Martin, the team in Bangkok, to grab him in French during the first audience in the Court of Justice. And we can see an extract. He was full of confidence, and the story for him was the same as he did when he came back today. America was the worst enemy. So this is just an example now.
Listen, Americans with all their means and money never managed to show any evidence in 12 months. Until now, they've done nothing.
Victor Bout speaking perfect French.
Indeed, like he can speak 10 languages. This is what we didn't know because he was an extraordinary, mysterious man. So we took the opportunity
You knew
to
he
ambush
spoke
him.
French?
We didn't know, so we just took the opportunity to speak with him in French, and he did. But off camera, he was extremely confident. He was about to be deported a year after this interview to America, but he was saying, I have all the files. I worked with the Americans, I worked with the French, I worked with the UN, providing planes everywhere from Liberia to wherever. So he was extremely confident that he would be released soon. But it happened, but 11 years later.
Yeah, because let's remember, Victor Bout involved in Liberia, where Charles Taylor's rebels had the support of certain Francophone countries, involved in what was then the crumbling Yugoslavia. He was a product of that post-Cold War era when there was this huge stockpile of Soviet weapons.
Indeed, and it looks like it is going back to square one, as you said. This is back to this kind of footage of exchange of prisoners on the tarmac of Saudi. Looks like very much back on the Cold War images. So the question is really treated as a political prisoner, as a star political prisoner back to Russia? What is the meaning of that? What will be the purpose for the circle of Vladimir Putin to have him back now? This is a $1 million question, but this man is extremely still powerful, I guess, and we'll have to see what's going to be ahead with his return to Russia.
All right, we're going to talk more about that public relations coup, but how useful now is Victor Bout? You mentioned he's 55, no longer 40. His way of operating, is that from a bygone era? Is he at all useful for people?
Very difficult to say. The way he's used as a propaganda tool, and the way he was flown back was going to be and his first interview today on Russian newspaper was extremely to divide us. We are not governed by anyone. So this is very much in the words of Vladimir Putin. So we will see what's going to be ahead.
Certainly useful information more. Many thanks, Cyril Payan. We'll be talking about it more again in the next hour in the world this week. The Gulf acting as the neutral turf where that prisoner exchange took place. That is a difference. It's no longer Berlin and the bridge of spies that was the place for the swap. Leo McGuinn has that story.
Brittany Griner stepping foot on US soil for the first time in 10 months. At the heart of negotiating her release, the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The basketball star swapped with US prisoner Victor Bout in Abu Dhabi. According to a joint statement, both nations were key in mediating any talks between Russia and the US.
The successful mediation efforts reflect the strong ties of friendship that the two countries share with the United States and Russia, and the important role played by the leadership of the two brotherly countries in strengthening dialogue between all sides.
While the US has not confirmed either country's role in the talks, one thing is for sure, both Gulf nations have positioned themselves into a unique diplomatic position. Despite condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they refuse to go as far as backing sanctions against the Kremlin, and both states have since emerged as key middlemen between Moscow and Washington, even mediating a prisoner swap in September, where 10 foreign nationals captured by Russian A similar story for the UAE. In October, Vladimir Putin hailed his country's ties with the state after meeting leader Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. All of this while both nations have still managed to maintain relations with the US, relations that had been frosty between Saudi Arabia and the US since Joe Biden became president, with Biden condemning the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. But the war in Ukraine forced the US's hand. As Biden visited the kingdom for the first time in his presidency this July, seeking a solution to the surge in oil prices, also meeting with the UAE's president whilst there. And last month, the Biden administration recommended that the Crown Prince should have immunity in the Khashoggi killing lawsuit, in a further attempt to amend relations between the two global superpowers.
Certainly more than a fist bump for China's president in Saudi Arabia. This Friday, Xi Jinping treated to not one but two summits in Riyadh. First with the Gulf Cooperation Council. Here you see him in the company of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And then of the Arab League, Xi Jinping heaping praise on his hosts and talking about deepening ties. It comes, though, at a time when the price of oil is dipping. The reopening of China raising fears that that will spread COVID and thus reduce productivity and output in factories there. The number of oil tankers backed up in the Black Sea has climbed to 28 this Friday. Turkey enforcing new rules to check the paperwork on tankers. They insist they don't want to fall foul of G7 nations that sanction those that can't prove that the Russians aren't selling their oil at or below $60 a barrel. The problem, almost all of them that are in the Black Sea waiting to clear the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles are carrying Kazakh crude, not Russian. Insurers accusing Ankara of overzealousness in the wake of that decision on earlier this week to enforce a rule that limits the import to Europe of Russian oil. They say the Turkish request going, quote, well beyond the general information that's normally required. Well, for more, let's cross to Brussels. He's a former EU ambassador to Turkey. Marc Pierini, thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Good evening.
What's your take? Why?
Well,
what's going on here?
Well, essentially, it's a cat and mouse game. What you have is on December 5th, first of all, the EU embargo on seaborne oil from Russia. That created a rush with additional tankers trying to cross the Bosphorus before December 5th. That's one thing. Then you have the price cap, as you mentioned, $60 a barrel. That's another type of sanction. And of course, everybody is trying to rush. As you clearly stated, Turkey, which has not implemented sanctions, which has this balancing policy between the West and Russia, doesn't want to be falling under secondary sanctions. There is a mix here of Russian oil and probably a majority of Kazakh oil, but essentially Turkey is trying to manage a very difficult position because having a balancing policy between Russia and the West is fine on paper, but when you come to the details, to the nitty-gritty of all this, these operations, it is extremely complicated, and increasingly both the United States and the European Union are looking at countries and also at their own companies trying to bypass sanctions. And of course, there are suspicions. Therefore, Turkey is extremely prudent this time after having been accused under a totally different operation, the grain deal, of having accepted on Turkish territory Ukrainian grain stolen by Russians and exported by Russian cargoes. So it is a very complicated situation, very difficult to document on a timely basis, but this is the game.
But
sanctions are piling up, and at the same time,
because I've heard the criticism that's leveled more fiercely towards Ankara, saying that they're doing Russia's bidding. That in fact, if you look at the numbers already over the last 6 months, and one Finnish energy firm did so, the amount of refined petroleum products from Turkey has risen since the start of the war. Turkey's not an oil producer itself, thus raising the suspicion that they're refining Russian crude.
That was true until last month. In the course of the summer in particular, you had about twice the volume of Russian crude exported to Turkey, refined in Turkey and becoming either gasoline or kerosene or whatever, and exported as a Turkish product. Since Turkey hasn't implemented itself sanctions, whatever comes out of its own refinery.
Это же очередная порция в твою копилку, многоуважаемый Павел. Что же, я сам не олигарх, но поддержка превыше всяких там условностей. Надеюсь, что даже этот скромный вклад тебе поможет.
On Turkish soil, so everybody is rushing to find loopholes, but at one point, if we look at financial flows, real estate purchases, gas sales, oil transit, and so on, it is clear that Turkey so far has, let's say, tried to satisfy Western sanctions indirectly, but as in effect, for financial reasons, economic reasons, and political reasons, played a Russian game. That's pretty clear.
And is there any justification for holding up Kazakh tankers?
Well, it's linked to the fear of being caught in some sort of secondary or tertiary sanction. So, you know, there is pressure being applied by all parties. Turkey is obviously under pressure from Russia for many, many different reasons, because of its agricultural exports, because of Russian tourists, because of gas supplies, because of the nuclear plant being built and owned by Russia, and because of the defense agreement on missiles. So it has a number of liabilities with the West, but at the same time, a number of strategic and financial interests with Russia. So Turkey is trying to balance out, and it's becoming extremely difficult. Now then, you're mentioning the proportion of Kazakh and Russian oil. This is very difficult to document from the outside, but clearly Turkey is now being more careful than only a month or two ago.
And so far, we're hearing in Western capitals, like, for instance, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, proceeding with caution, giving Turkey the benefit of the doubt, saying they don't think that they're doing this in the interest of Russia. Is that what's going on behind the scenes, or is that what they truly think?
Well, what you have now, at least temporarily, is a positive phase for the president of Turkey. He has voted with the West at the UN General Assembly in the NATO ministerials, has closed the Bosphorus Straits according to the Montreux Convention as soon as the invasion took place. So on paper and on the political principles, Turkey is with the West, except that Turkey is trying to maintain trade and is making a lot of money out of the crisis, Russian money. If you look at the amount of deposits in Turkish banks by Russian individuals or companies, it's been rocketing up. If you look at real estate purchases, same thing. Therefore, there is a lot of financial aspects linked to this balancing policy. Now, everybody is trying to manage quietly the relationship with Turkey for a simple reason. Turkey is a NATO member. At the same time, it's the only NATO member which has purchased Russian missiles deployed with Russian personnel. At the same time, Russia is, together with Hungary, the only country in NATO blocking the enlargement to Sweden and Finland. Therefore, the rest of NATO is trying to manage carefully the relationship with Turkey, knowing that the electoral campaign, presidential and legislative elections next year, is already ongoing, and therefore nobody wants to, in Europe or in the States, wants to fall as an electoral argument in the Turkish campaign. There are major strategic differences with Turkey, especially on the Russian missiles, but this is in a way left on the side for the moment, and we'll see what the results of the election are. Erdogan might remain in power, he might lose power, who knows. Therefore, these issues probably will be taken up again after the elections.
All right, so another 7 months until that happens. Many thanks, Marc Pierini, for joining us, or less, from Brussels. Thank you for being with us. Russian forces shelling the entire front line in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region. That's according to authorities in Kyiv, with the fiercest fighting near the eastern towns of Bakhmut and Avdiivka. The Ukrainians answering in kind with some fierce fighting taking place this Friday. That fierce fighting, of course, means more displaced people at the outset of winter. France 24's Robert Parsons speaks not far from Europe's largest nuclear power plant in the central Zaporizhzhia region.
We're at a center for internally displaced people from Enerhodar, about 50 kilometers away from here, and home to the largest nuclear power station in Europe. About 70% of the population has fled since the start of the war, and many of them have come here to Zaporizhzhia, to this center, where they can get foodstuffs, where they can get warm clothing, where they can get bedding for the winter, and where they can get psychological help from experts here at the center. Alyona is a volunteer at the center and herself fled in Enerhodar when the Russians invaded.
The center has a shortage of hygiene items. We don't get enough from our donors. Same with blankets and warm clothes. For instance, we have received 200 such items and are trying to work out how to share them with 5,000 people.
We are very grateful to this center for the good quality food packages they have given us, and the towels, children's food and sanitary products.
In the depot here, we've got aid from all over the world. Here, for instance, the Croix-Rouge Française, French Red Cross. Over here, we've got pasta from Ukraine. And just here from Denmark, from the Danish Red Cross, pillowcases. Oleksiy is a member of the UNEP. He escaped at the beginning of July when he was warned that the Russians were going to arrest him.
Putting workers at the nuclear plant under psychological pressure to sign.
Portion of Kazakh and Russian.
you're familiar with the jail? Well, if you know right there where the Sally Port is, right next to the Sally Port is where the door to the kitchen is. And basically it's where a truck can back in and you can start unloading supplies there. So that's kind of how that works. No, apparently what I saw, that's not going to be the case. It was just unfortunately this is like most crimes, it's usually a crime of opportunity. And apparently this just happened. He happened to see this moment. We have had these things occur in the past before in my 34 years where, the inmates are taking garbage out and then one of them takes off running. So we have had situations like this in the past, but we try to do everything we can do to try to prevent this from happening. Probably, it varies from time to time, but I would say usually probably my career probably once every few years or so. The best story I'll tell y'all, one not per se to put on the air, but this was the jail here, okay? We had what we classified as the gas man that worked right downstairs, where these steps are here. It was the Sally Port, okay? He gets some news from his girlfriend or something, whatever, so he decides he's going to leave, so he got in a patrol car and drove. We had a patrol car chasing a patrol car all over downtown Tuscaloosa. Now, this is back in the 80s, late 80s, you see what I'm saying? But, so you've had situations like that, that's happened. None of it is acceptable, so. Yes, typically inmate workers that we have are going to have very minimal charges. I say minimal in the big picture of everything. So they may or may not even probably going down the prison. They're probably going to get time served in the county or things along that avenue. But like in this particular case, he's got to pick up additional charges that can actually end up with doing way more time than he would have probably ever imagined or even been close to on the original charges. No, I know not anything of substance when he came to the jail. I'm sure he was not very happy, from my understanding, when he got back brought into the jail. So, but that's it. TPD officers, we had our guys over there in TPD, and I think Norfolk was getting information, and I think we were tracking with the dogs, and I think somebody had saw him in a house, and TPD officers, so I really want to give them a lot of credit and say how much I appreciate their help, and the Norfolk Police Department. And we're blessed here in Tuscaloosa County because all of us work extremely well together. And this is just an example of this. Hey, this happens, all these are coming together, we're all working together, and it leads to the capture of this guy in less than 2 hours. I'm betting all together, I'm guessing you probably had close to 50 officers combined, you know, because you got unmarked units, you got the PPD officers, you got Northport, our officers, you got our investigators coming in, you got a lot of people responding. Police Department and Northport Police Department.
It was a wild morning there in Tuscaloosa as they were able to find that inmate there hiding behind a couch and now back into custody. And safe to say that this individual will not be able to have the same sort of perks that they had earlier this week. You're watching live now. Fox, everyone, we are going to take another quick 2-minute break. Stay right here with us. More to come on Live Now.